Questions linger over Russia's President Vladimir Putin's attendance of the BRICS summit that's to be held in South Africa next month. The ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, says the government has not received confirmation that Putin will be present. Meanwhile, the Deputy President, Paul Mashatile, says a government is still trying to persuade Putin not to attend the summit. Putin has a warrant of his arrest by the International Criminal Court for alleged war crimes that have been committed in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. International relations expert Dr. Charles Sinkala and Willem from the Institute for Security Studies join me now for a quick analysis of what we are seeing. Gentlemen, thank you both for your time. Can I kick off the conversation with you, Dr. Sinkala? For the longest time, this conversation, and I suppose rightly so, has been focused on the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I think now that the BRICS summit is almost here, perhaps the attention also should be focused on the relations between the BRICS nations themselves, and perhaps this presents that opportunity with the political parties of these countries now meeting. Let's start with the South Africa-Russia relationship, purely based on this, what has now been revealed by Deputy President Paul Mashatile, that South Africa is trying to persuade him not to come, but the Russians are not pleased. How do you think that relationship looks like right now?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers. Look, South Africa and Russia, they have had a very long-term relationship in terms of their bilateral engagement. And as well, they've been consistent in which side they support themselves, especially as you will likely mention during the war, the invasion of Russia and Ukraine, for that matter. But look, it is not up to DECO, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Cooperation for South Africa, or including the President or Deputy President of South Africa, to decide whether or not Putin should come to South Africa. I think to the larger extent it is on his court, that he values it's significant of him coming to South Africa, or rather what is security problems he might encounter. Putin now is the most wanted criminal in the world in terms of other partners which they have considered him to have committed those crimes. So he easily can be assassinated immediately he leaves Russia. I think he's more comfortable to be in Russia. Russia is not going to hold South Africa for that advice that they're blocking him to come to South Africa to attend the BRICS summit. Yes, it is important, but there's other avenues, I'm sure, that they will explore in terms of him attending this. And I think this BRICS summit, which is coming to South Africa, will be a very different one from the previous one. I think now BRICS countries, now they are mapping up themselves against the West, against the United States of America.
Mr. Els, let me come to you. Do you share the sentiment that Mr. Putin is possibly the most wanted criminal in the world right now, and his move away from the Russian Federation, away from those borders, could potentially put him at risk in terms of his life? But should we then take seriously what we are reading, that there is insistence on the part of Russia that he physically attends the BRICS summit? And what does he have to gain by being physically present?
Yes, I agree with the professor. President Putin is under severe pressure at the moment, but also he would like to make a stance by attending and showing the world that he can still move around for his own image, etc. But we must just stand back and see why he is one of the most wanted criminals. The Rome Statutes was signed by South Africa back in 1998. We ratified it in 2000, and in 2002 we actually pushed an act. It's called the Rome Statute Implementation Act through Parliament. So that is a law in South Africa that binds us even more because we ratified it. And if you look at the Rome statutes, why they're only prosecuting 4 different crimes. So they're looking at serious crimes, and that is your crimes against humanity, your war crimes, your crimes of aggression, and also we look at genocide. So those are very serious crimes, and those crimes were decided on because most often those are being committed by heads of state and by governments, and that is more or less to bring them to book. Where we look at what happened in Africa in terms of the Rwanda genocide, etc. We look at what happened in Uganda earlier with Idi Amin's rule, and so on. So with many of the rules of your so-called dictators in Africa, we saw that some of these crimes have been committed, and those people got away with it. So that is why it is so important that even heads of state being held to bring to account. We see that since South Africa signed it, there were actually 2 sitting heads of state that were actually brought to book by the Rome Statutes and by the ICC, and that is Jomo Kenyatta from Kenya. We see he was acquitted, along with his now serving President Ruto, and also, of course, al-Bashir that was here in South Africa from Sudan, and he was sent back home with a lunchbox under his arm in the middle of the night because we had to adhere to the Rome Statutes.
Yeah. Dr. Sinkala, again, focusing the attention on the Russia-South Africa relations. Not so long ago, our president, at the behest of the African Union, would have gone to Russia alongside other African heads of state, Russia and Ukraine, to try and do what I think many European countries have so far been unable to do, to try and facilitate peace talks between these 2 countries. And what happened when the president of South Africa got to Russia, he was very clear to President Putin about the abduction of children from Ukraine, that he was very clear about. Also, there was the other element that he was quite pointed at, and that is that this war that is going on, it's got to come to a stop because it not just affects Europe, but it also affects much of the African continent. Why am I painting this context? There is a development around the grain that is supposed to move through the Black Sea. Russia has pulled out of that deal, and that is going to, again, compromise African states who are in need of the grain exports because of food insecurity. Does that tell us anything, Dr. Sinkala, about the relationship between South Africa and Russia, given that just in the past few days, President Ramaphosa is reported to have been on a phone call to President Putin almost on a daily? I don't know if I'm exaggerating.
Well, we can never, ignore the relationship between South Africa and Russia, especially President Ramaphosa and President Putin. They are intimately connected, and you can even see how President Ramaphosa, he does it very professionally, as not to look publicly that he's on the side of Russia. But all this, what is happening in Ukraine at the moment, and especially the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, has actually exacerbated the economic downfall, especially post the COVID pandemic, where countries was trying just to rebuild, and now we are faced with food shortages and many other factors which has affected. The trip for African countries, I must say, to go to Russia and Ukraine was not to go and negotiate the conflict. It's basically to go and hear both sides of the those who are fighting into this war, and as well as indicating to the 2 presidents, President Zelensky and President Putin, that look, it's not only the people of Ukraine and the people of Russia who are being affected by this war, but also from Africa's side, we are being affected. Can we find a solution and means and ways and how to mitigate this war? so that it can come to an end. But these are sentiments that other people who didn't understand the reason why African leaders went there. They thought that African leaders could have gone there to stop the war. Yes, they can stop the war, but each and every influence is part and parcel of trying to negotiate the impact of the war in Ukraine to many other African countries, including the world. Yes, it's historically been noted that, many European countries has never come up, especially from the West, to go to both two countries and, discuss on how well to end this war, because some of them have been accused to be fueling this war as they are pocketing money out of the deaths of the people.
Willem, let's come back to you. Let's shift the attention now to China and India. A very important admission was made by the Deputy President talking to the Mail and Guardian in the past week. And the admission is that South Africa did ask that China be the host, given the implication that if Putin comes to South Africa, he has to be arrested because of South Africa's being a signatory to the International Criminal Court. And the sentiment there, at least painted in that article, is that India was not so chuffed about that, purely because there are problems between China and India. Are you able to frame that relationship between the two countries?
Yes, Koli, India and China has been for some years now been in a border conflict there in the Himalayas, where every now and then, almost monthly and weekly, there are some eruptions of violence between them. They are attacking across the border, and then it stabilizes again. And that has been something that's been going on for years now, and we don't see that will be solved in the near future. Because it is just a lingering problem that's been ongoing, and the whole thing there is about land, that they are disputed borders, and they will continue until we have an international sort of consensus on that. So that is actually very interesting that within your BRICS you have these two countries who's been at war or in conflict at least for so many years that they form part of BRICS, and they manage to work together. So that is why we can anticipate that should then one be favored or one be asked to actually stand in for South Africa, that there might be some pushback from the other country.
Dr. Sinkala, coming back to you, let's then come to the matter that South Africa is concerned with right now, and that is to host this summit and host a successful summit. At this stage, I think it's fair to say South Africa is in a catch-22 because Russia is insistent that its president will physically attend this summit. On top of that, you have a refusal for the summit to move to another country. What does South Africa do? Because the only next step there is to uninvite Russia. Can they do that?
Wow. That's a good one. Russia is the biggest, one of the biggest partner of BRICS, the initiators of BRICS. I think without Russia, I don't think BRICS can stand. It's a big partner in terms of even the financial model that they have established, which is similar to IMF. If you talk about the function of BRICS, it's got its own bank, that has reserves, and they have contributed about 5 billion each country, which is part of it, that money which they're using around. And that bank is based in Moscow. So the significance of Russia being part of this BRICS summit in South Africa, it's very important, and the other countries as well would like to meet Russia. We saw what has happened in the past couple of weeks, that many countries have tendered their application to be part of BRICS. So Russia stands at a position that is very important. And I think to them they will prove to the world that they are superpowers. They've got that muscle in terms of military, and they cannot hide or fear, for flying into South Africa. I think it will happen because at the moment, if we look at the laws, yes, South Africa ratified the ICC, convention, in terms of that. But South Africa is a democratic state and is a constitutional state, where the constitution is supreme. So any laws that are inconsistent with the constitution, section 172 is very clear that that law shall be declared unlawful. And if you look at the ICC itself, it's not an organization that is clean and sound. It's been accused on many occasions of having biased prosecution in terms of leaders, like what my fellow panelist mentioned on how al-Bashir was issued the warrant of arrest, and South Africa ignored that.
Yeah.
There hasn't been any processes to try or to give a chance to the sitting president, to answer to allegations, whether or not those allegations were true or not. But as the head of state of the country, there is some processes that needs to be followed. So South Africa, yes, they're in the position of a predicament, but if they follow their constitution, the laws by the ICC and the issuing of the arrest warrants was done unlawfully and cannot be contained. So the BRICS summit can go ahead with Putin coming into South Africa, provided that security has been beefed up to make sure that there's no disturbance or any exposure to threatening or in terms of deaths or any other adversities, which South Africa is capable if they combine with Russia to protect Putin to come in the country.
Mr. Els, very, very briefly, I'm completely out of time. Do you have any thoughts about how South Africa can get around this one? Because they can't do an al-Bashir number 2.
Tolly, yes, I hear what the professor says, but I do not agree completely with him. Yes, we are governed by our constitution, but also we've got the act that went through Parliament, and before that act has been tested in the Concord, we cannot. That act stands, and that act actually forces the government at the moment to arrest, and that is also what happened. The government appointed a committee to advise them, and it seems from the response from the Deputy President that advice came back that there's no way out. When he sets his foot in South Africa, he will have to be arrested in terms of the law.
Willem Els, let me thank you very much for that. He is with the Institute for Security Studies, and Dr. Charles Sinkala is an international relations expert. Thank you to both for the explanation here.